I mean, cannabis, it's greater than 70 million years old. We believe we humans have had a personal relationship with it for thousands of years, most likely originating around 12,000 BC. So we really evolved with this plant and thereby have, of course, developed this really rigorous internal system that the plant can also respond to. And that's not only us, but most mammals.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Different Leaf, the podcast. I'm Britt Smith, ready to learn all about how humans get stoned. Like many of you, my first experience with marijuana was in high school, enjoying a giggly afternoon with some friends on the football field. But as an adult, I discovered that weed did more than just make me happy. It also helped for a litany of medical issues. Who knew? Since about 2015, I've turned to marijuana for gallstone pain, a pinched spinal nerve, anxiety, and some insomnia and PTSD. When my mum was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2016, I started reading up on how cannabis could slow some cancerous tumor growth, and that led me down this rabbit hole about how it could help Alzheimer's, diabetes, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, and the list goes on. This episode, we're going to learn exactly how this one plant does so much for so many human conditions. Today, we're picking the brain of cannabis educator Emma Chasen. Emma is a Brown University graduate with a specialized biology degree in medicinal plant research. She moved out west a few years ago and became director of education at Pharma Cannabis Dispensary in Portland, Oregon, where she developed a robust training curriculum rooted in cannabis science, product knowledge, and empathetic patient care. So tell me a little bit about how you started off over here on the East Coast at Brown, and what you were studying and how that went.
Yeah, so I had gone into Brown thinking that I was going to do the traditional kind of pre-medical science, the concentration in biology, because I was focused on getting my MD. I really didn't know any other path beyond that to help engage with people and empower them through their kind of health and wellness journeys. That was always my mission from since I was very young. I really was so drawn to that. But I was also drawn to a lot of folk methodology and looking at the way in which indigenous peoples across the world have used plant medicine and have sat in ceremony and have really adopted more of what we call in the Western world holistic healing, where you look at not only the physical, but also mental, emotional, and spiritual. And I took I took a seminar my freshman year at Brown titled Botanical Roots of Modern Medicine, which really kind of opened my eyes to the world of ethnobotany as an actual course of study. So ethnobotany is the way in which indigenous peoples use medicinal plants. And because Brown has quite a liberal program, I was able to devise my own course curriculum within their biology department to really focus on medicinal plant research and ethnobotany. And so I was able to not only complete that course of study, but also do pre-medical sciences to kind of help bridge that gap and really focus on the pursuit of an integrative model. So understanding that Western allopathic medicine, there are amazing things about that. If you have a broken leg, like you will want to go to the hospital. The technological advancements are awesome, but in the areas of preventative and holistic healthcare, it doesn't quite fit, where I think that we can learn a lot from plant medicine and our plant allies. And so kind of combining those two things and being able to learn about both of them at a university was just amazing. And I mean, it really set me up for then working in cannabis.
So this wasn't at all centered around cannabis. This was like you're learning about every kind of plant and the biology of how it interacts with human bodies.
Exactly.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. I'd say that we mostly actually studied ayahuasca. So we did look at a lot of like psychotropic elements, and that was where I was introduced to like alkaloids and terpenes and all these secondary compounds that play a role in the kind of pharmacognosy of our experience. Cannabis, it was like a little blip in the course curriculum. So I was much like you, reading any kind of scientific articles or journals that I can get my hands on around the way that cannabis interacts with the body.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to pick your brain. What exactly did you learn about how cannabis interacts with the body? This must have been the very beginning of what we were really learning about it.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot of things that have since been debunked or that science and scientific advancements have proven to be wrong. I remember one of the first things that I learned was that THC binds to the CB1 receptor, CBD binds to the CB2 receptor. We know
that's not true?
That's not true. No. Yeah, we know that now. THC and CBD, they both interact with the CB1 receptor in particular ways, but neither of them really interacts with the CB2 receptor in meaningful ways. I learned a lot about the therapeutic potential also in many different types of cancers. And when I graduated from Brown, I went on to work at the oncology research group that they had as part of Brown University's medical school. And I really thought that that would be my place of impact. Yeah. And we actually did have a really brilliant professor who proposed a cannabis trial, but my supervisor, unfortunately, kind of laughed him out of the office and was just like, that's impossible. And I understand where she was coming from, but also that lack of respect for the potential of cannabis to be helpful in the realm of oncology was something that definitely was a kind of light bulb moment where I was like, I can't be here anymore. This is not for me. And that's when I kind of made my way across the country and moved away from the East Coast to pursue just more opportunity in the plant medicine field in general.
Are you finding that there's more science centers out there or more research studies on the West Coast?
There is definitely more access to like-minded people who will be able to talk about research and will be able to at least entertain the ideas that cannabis is quite a powerful medicine and a powerful therapeutic. I think that also just in the last 6 years, I mean, research has exploded. There have been so many studies that have come out, not only through Israel, but also the Czech Republic and even the United States, that have shown that cannabis compounds do have quite a range of therapeutic properties. I mean, Dr. Ethan Russo is such a champion of medical cannabis research and has published many a paper, most recently from 2014 on. And so I graduated Brown in 2014. And when I was conducting kind of my personal research during my undergraduate years, it was still quite new. And I think that we have made a lot of advancements in our understanding of the way that cannabis works with our bodies since then.
So what we've discovered so far has to do with the endocannabinoid system, which is, from what I understand, sort of the meta system of all the other internal systems inside the body. And you kind of mentioned that there are CB1 and CB2 receptors on this endocannabinoid system. How is it that cannabis has an effect on absolutely everything to do with the body through this system? What's chemically going on there?
So the endocannabinoid system, like you said, is kind of like this meta system. It does not belong to a singular organ. So most of our body systems belong to an organ, and the organ or organs are kind of like the hubs of that system. The endocannabinoid system doesn't have a singular organ that it is associated with. Instead, I use the analogy of it's the oil to our body's Tin Man, where our bodies are really complex machines. All these organ systems are running all of the time just to keep us alive. I mean, you're going to run into problems if you have a machine that is constantly running with no break. And so the endocannabinoid system exists to be able to kind of lube up the areas that get rusty. And when those areas do get rusty, that's when disease states occur. And the endocannabinoid system thereby not only helps us to recover from disease states more efficiently, but also helps us to prevent those disease states from ever occurring. The ECS, it is made up of cannabinoid receptors. So we're talking about the CB1, the CB2 receptors. I believe that scientists think that there are about 12, but probably many more that we don't know about yet. We also have our own endogenous cannabinoids. So our body makes cannabinoids that can fit into these receptors. And the two most prominent ones are anandamide and 2-AG. And they're actually very chemically similar to THC and CBD and the other cannabinoids, phytocannabinoids that are found in the cannabis plant.
How is it that our brains are producing something so similar to the cannabis plant, or any plant, in fact?
Isn't it amazing? I mean, it just speaks to how interconnected we are with the natural world around us. And I mean, cannabis, it's greater than 70 million years old. We believe we humans have had a personal relationship with it for thousands of years, most likely originating around 12,000 BC. So we really evolved with this plant and thereby have, of course, developed this really rigorous internal system that the plant can also respond to. And that's not only us, but most mammals also have these cannabinoid receptors and endocannabinoids as well. Dr. Ethan Russo, that researcher that I mentioned, he does have a theory that most people are operating in a diminished ECS tone, meaning that our bodies aren't producing a lot of these endocannabinoids. And therefore, we are experiencing medical issues like migraines and IBS and neuropathic pain, fibromyalgia, issues that we don't really have a good treatment for at this point. And cannabis and its phytocannabinoids can actually help to mitigate those more negative side effects coming from these medical issues because they mimic the endogenous cannabinoids that our body produces and thereby can bind to these receptors to initiate a variety of effects, really in the realm of what we call homeostasis. So the ECS, as it is, like I said, the oil to that Tin Man just helps the body to come back to balance. Right. And that's really important when trying to prevent and also recover from disease.
So you mentioned THC and CBD, and there are, hundreds of other compounds that are produced within different strains of cannabis plants. And yes. How in the world do we know what we're talking about when we're talking about how much THC or CBD to use, or whether to use a different isolated cannabinoid? What do we know and how do we know it?
That's a great question, because when we look at cannabis, we can get really overwhelmed by the compound diversity. And we still don't even know all of the compounds that are within the cannabis matrix. At this point, we've identified around 112, but there could be many, many more. When it comes to cannabis and really all plant medicine, botanical medicine is subjective and it is highly personal, and therefore it will require some experimentation when we start to integrate it into our lifestyle, and it will also require a playing around of dose. There's not one standardized dose that we can prescribe, so to speak, to every single person who has neuropathy. Mm-hmm. That is something that we have achieved through allopathic medicine, where it's like, okay, most people need 2 ibuprofen to take care of a headache. That doesn't happen with botanical medicine. Instead, we need to conduct a really thorough, experimentational process where the person who is starting to integrate cannabis into their lifestyle can really keep track of their experience to identify certain patterns around their consumption experience to then let them know what's going to work best for them. With that being said, there are definitely strategies in place that we can employ to make sure that people don't have an uncomfortable experience. So, for example, microdosing is huge, taking a very small amount of a compound. In the case of THC, a microdose is identified as around 2.5 milligrams. Oh, so small. Most people, very small. So most people at that dose will not experience negative side effects. But it's important to start there so that way you can kind of conduct this regimented dose increase of a milligram by milligram by milligram until you arrive at your optimal therapeutic dose. And that is, in general, what we call in the cannabis science community biphasic dosing. So really looking at getting to that personal, optimal therapeutic dose for the specific experience that you want by starting out with a very small amount and slowly but surely increasing.
So for people that have an incredibly high tolerance because they've been using cannabis, day in, day out probably a high percentage of THC, I would imagine. You can get to a point where your tolerance is so high that you really don't feel any effects from the cannabis medicine anymore. What is going on there when when you're not feeling any more of the high?
So that again relates back to this biphasic dose response curve where you will reach a point, a concentration